Flag, a question for Mr. Dent.
Let's talk about earmarks. Everyone opposes them for inflating the budget deficit and building bridges to nowhere, yet everyone in Congress fights to bring them home. Mr. Dent, you've sponsored millions in earmarks for Lehigh Valley projects, and you're all for reducing the federal debt. So which is it? Do you swear off earmarks to take the high road, or keep carving out the bacon and the pork chops because we all like that taste so much? You can't have it both ways.
Yeah, first, let me be very clear about earmarks. I've supported the moratorium. There are no earmarks this year. I'll continue to support that moratorium. I believe the earmarks will be eliminated if the Republicans do take the majority. We get a lot of pressure from our constituencies for earmarks. In fact, Mayor Callahan's office submitted a request for 14 earmarks from my office this year. No one's getting any this year. But when we have used them generally largely for infrastructure projects and others. But I support the moratorium. I think it's an important thing. There needs to be more transparency and accountability. And I can assure you that that will happen should there be a new majority in Congress.
Mr. Towne?
Sure. On earmarks, I think that in general, a lot of the spending that the federal government does, they don't clearly delineate a lot of those things. And I think offering amendments to the bills so that instead of having a blanket, $30 billion of spending, it is kind of good to have these delineated in list form. But in terms of what you're referring to, the earmarks in Congress, the abuse and everything, I would also act to get rid of it. And I think the amendments before the bill is voted on should be done with.
Mr. Callahan?
This is an example of, again, where Washington has failed. You're right. Charlie has supported millions of dollars in earmarks, many of which are for his donors to his campaign. He was called out for this in a New York newspaper, one of the few congressmen in all of the country called out for supporting earmarks for his contributors. And I think, and I'll give you some egregious examples of that. It's bad enough that we had an $850 billion no-strings-attached bailout of Wall Street, but at the end of the day, we had a $700 billion bailout that Charlie voted against because he said in the paper that it was going to expose taxpayers unnecessarily at the expense of taxpayers and an exorbitant bailout for Wall Street. The only difference between the $700 billion bailout that Charlie voted against and the one that he voted for 4 days later was it was loaded with $150 billion of pork, $192 million for rebates to the Puerto Rican rum industry, and $2 million for toy arrows for children. That's Charlie Dent's record on earmarks.
Ms. Olenoff, a question for Mr. Towne.
The debate over Don't Ask, Don't Tell has been going back and forth in the courts in recent weeks, but President Obama says it's an issue he wants Congress to address. What's your position about allowing gays to serve openly in the military?
Thank you. That's a great question. And what I believe is that a service member's sexual preference just really has no bearing whatsoever on their ability to defend the nation. And I support repealing Don't Ask and Don't Tell. What I'd like to add in terms of the bailouts, both of the amendments I'm facing currently, Congressman Dent, Mr. Dent has voted for the bailouts. And while Mr. Callahan says that he is also against bailouts, he would have supported the first version of the bailouts. So really, in terms of bailouts, what we have is a very clear delineation. I myself am against taxpayer-paid bailouts of private corporations.
Mr. Callahan?
Well, let me make it clear, I've never supported the Wall Street bailout. I will tell you this, in terms of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, I do think that this policy needs to be ended. I agree with the Secretary of Defense. I agree with our Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mullen, that this is a policy that should end, and it should end now. I don't think that the men and women who are proudly serving and defending our country in the military ought to have to do it under a lie. And so I think it's high time that this policy end, and as a member of Congress, I would vote to end it.
Mr. Dent?
I believe this policy needs to be reformed and needs to be changed, but Secretary Gates and Admiral Mullen, they want to change, but they don't want to change now. We are going through a very serious review by the Defense Department. We're interviewing probably hundreds of thousands of troops about this policy, how to change it, because it'll have some impacts on readiness, recruitment, retention. We want to make sure we get it right before we make any changes. That's very clear, but first we must hear from the troops about how we should go about making the change. That review will be brought back to us in December. We should take in that input before we make any serious changes. By the way, the earmarks that he had requested, he did request 14 from my office this year, and he also has included the R&D tax credit now as pork, as he refers to the TARP, which he supported, then he said he didn't support, but very clearly he has supported, he is now calling the R&D tax credit alternative minimum tax relief for taxpayers as pork. I think you should hear that. That's been an earmark.
Mr. Flagg, a question for Mr. Callahan.
The cap-and-trade program has been criticized as unaffordable and an unfair tax on developed nations, especially the United States. Do you support it? And if not, how do we begin to counter the effects of climate change?
I do not support cap and trade. I think this is an important area where I differ from the Democratic leadership. We have led on this issue in the city of Bethlehem. We reduced our greenhouse gas emissions and carbon footprints in the city, but we've done it through taking advantage of incentives. I think we in the federal government can offer more carrots and less sticks to get both the private sector and the public sector to operate more efficiently. We've done it in the city of Bethlehem. We've saved millions of dollars to the taxpayers of the city by operating more efficiently, and we've done the right thing by the environment. So I don't agree with cap and trade. I don't think it's the right policy to get us to our end goal, and I think it has a very real possibility of costing jobs. So I do not support cap and trade. I do believe in climate change. I think it's real, and I think the federal government can play a role in incentivizing, as I said, corporations and the government and the public sector to operate more efficiently to the benefit of taxpayers and to the benefit of the environment.
Mr. Dent.
First, I do oppose the cap-and-trade legislation that came through the House. It will raise electric rates, it will raise natural gas bills, it will raise prices of gasoline and diesel at the pump. It is a mistake. It particularly punish Pennsylvania and other agricultural and industrial heartland states that are much more coal-dependent and carbon-reliant. It's a mistake. I just have to correct one thing that Mayor Callahan said. He actually does support cap-and-trade. He supported the mayor's climate protection pledge. He signed it, and it calls for a flexible market-based system of tradable allowances among emitting industries. That's cap-and-trade. So Mayor Callahan supports cap-and-trade, but candidate Callahan opposes cap-and-trade. He signed it. He also said he supported the Kyoto Protocols, which were rejected by the United States Senate 95-0, plus taxes on natural gas and oil to the tune of $22 billion.
Mr. Towne.
Sure. I also, I guess we're in concurrence here. I also do not support cap and trade. I believe that is at its heart a Goldman Sachs sponsored scheme that will create a false market based on this whole carbon credit system. I think that one of the greatest environmental possible impacts to our area is the issue of hydrofracking, which is taking place all over the, not in our particular district, but in the rest of the nation, in the rest of the state. And on that issue, I think that what we need to do on the state level and also on the federal level, I've asked Congressman Dent to support the FRAC Act, which would remove what is known as the Halliburton loophole so that the drilling can be regulated by the Safe Water Drinking Act on the state level. And I think that also we need to take a look at is putting in place surety bonds so that when these corporations, if they do pollute the environment, that they will not cause damage to our residents and drinking water.
And we need to replace this with medical liability reform, cross-state purchases, health and wellness initiatives and incentives, and there are a whole myriad of things. Deal with health care reform as a process, not one big deal that's jammed through with Cornhusker kickbacks and all kinds of other shady deals.
Mr. Towne.
Sure. What Mr. Dent has failed to mention that he also supports H.R. 5424, which will put in place the Reform Americans Can Afford Act. And the whole thing is that what this will do is it will establish universal access programs that are very similar in place to what's currently put in place by the Democrats, and it will be usurping state sovereignty with the use of taxpayer money to provide corrupt state innovation programs. Again, Congress, and whether it's Republicans or Democrats, what they are not addressing is the state-sponsored healthcare insurance cartels. And this has been going on for quite some time, since the HMO Act in 1973. I agree that what we do need to remove is the individual mandate that every citizen must purchase insurance from the government, and I object to also changes in the labor laws that will devastate the poor and the middle class. I support market-based reforms such as tax relief legislation, removal of state portability barriers, a sound currency, tort reform, and removal of the very expensive state mandates which control 15 to 40% of our premiums. Thank you.
Mr. Callahan.
I think this is another example of where Charlie Dent has failed us. He went to Washington in 2004 and he said that healthcare would be issue one for him. That's what Congressman Dent said 6 years ago. And he's done nothing. It's a lot of talk and very little in the way of results and very little in the way of actions. Healthcare premiums have risen since 2000 by 129%. They've risen since he got into Congress by 34%. You all know that. You all know that the current system was unsustainable, both for employers and for individuals. Something had to be done. And Charlie Dent refused to take any action. Whether it's transportation funding, he sits on the transportation committee, he talks about process, he talks about all the things that we should do. He's been there for 6 years. What has he done? When is he going to take accountability for his record? Near as I can tell, Charlie's taken their money, $400,000 of health insurance company monies. He's done nothing to improve the healthcare system in the time that he's been in Congress. I will do better.
Mr. Owens, a question for Mr. Towne.
Congressman from the Lehigh Valley can help make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that having an independent in the United States Congress will be quite important. And I think that the greatest threat to our national security is the national debt. It's not some boogeyman living in a cave in Pakistan. And what I support is getting our troops out of harm's way. I do not support these. We've lost over 5,700 soldiers, as well as quite a bit of expenses. Like we're literally bleeding our nation dry. And the way to go about addressing these criminals that caused 9/11 is with small military groups to procure them and bring them back as criminals for a court of law. We've been doing this for the past 9 years. It's not working. We have not secured our own borders. And that's another thing that I would act to do, and use our military to control the borders, and for the access points, whether it's airports, seaports, and highways, to use our Customs and Border Patrol. Thank you.
Mr. Callahan.
There's no question that the war in Afghanistan, which is in its ninth year, the longest war in American history, has taken a tremendous toll on the men and the women of our armed forces. And so I agree with the December review that's going to take place by the generals. I think that any decision to draw down our forces, the goal right now is the middle of next year, should be based on the recommendations of the generals and by the conditions on the ground. But most importantly, I think we need to take care of our veterans when they get back from Afghanistan, when they get back from Iraq. And Charlie Dent has not done that. Charlie Dent has repeatedly made votes that have cut benefits to veterans. And in fact, on May 11, 2005, he voted against the bill that would allow widows and orphans of our troops to receive their full benefits after their loved ones were killed in combat. It's not just about going to the hospitals. It's about supporting them, supporting the widows, and supporting the orphans and our troops when they come home from Afghanistan and from Iraq.
Mr. Dent.
Well, first, John, shame on you. Really, shame on you. Veterans Health has almost doubled since I've been a member of Congress. I voted for every one of those Veterans Health appropriations bills. I'm the candidate who was endorsed by the Veterans of Foreign Wars Political Committee. You can shake your head, no, John, but that is a fact. I'd be happy to give you the letter. You can have it. That's your endorsement. But I'd be happy to give it to you. That said, it's my time. That said, I've also been given an A rating in 2008 by the Iraq-Afghanistan Veterans of America. You'd never know that you're John Callahan. He even puts pictures of soldiers with bloody cheeks and says we're somehow hurting. Well, I've been to every combat hospital in Afghanistan and Iraq. I visited our troops. I've gone to those services, too, of those who gave that last full measure of devotion. I take that very seriously. In Afghanistan, I want to say one thing. I did meet with our generals, Petraeus, Admiral Mullen, and others, and look, the timeline the president has set down has created problems. I think the policy overall makes sense, but this has created enormous problems. It has sent mixed signals to friend and foe alike. They believe we're about to run out, and I think we have to be very clear about what our objectives are. We need more collaboration from the Pakistani government to deal with some of the safe havens of al-Qaeda, and particularly the Taliban. We must deal with that.
Ms. Olenoff, a question for Mr. Callahan.
Congressman Dent has called you a liar who is betraying Bethlehem taxpayers. Well, you say he has no concern for the middle class and has turned his back on our injured soldiers. What do these negative portrayals add to this race?
Look, I'm proud of my record as mayor. I think my record is very clear, whether it's on job creation and driving $2 billion of economic investment in the time that I've been mayor that's resulted in more than 5,000 new jobs in the city, and whether it's reducing $60 million of debt in the time that I've been mayor, balancing budgets and cutting government waste. That's my record. I'm proud of it. We're in a campaign, and we're going to compare each other's records. I think the question that everybody has to ask themselves is do we want to go back to the failed economic policies that got us here in the first place? Charlie Dent has been a member of Congress for 6 years. He's been a part of the problem. He's why we're in the mess that we're in. So we've got to have this